Nathan Bryan is an international expert in nitric biochemistry and molecular medicine. His more than 20 years in academic research led to many seminal discoveries and has resulted in dozens of issued US and international patents. Products from his innovations are the most successful nitric oxide products in the market and responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue around the globe and have improved patient care for more than a decade. Dr. Bryan.
Well, good afternoon. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invite. This is a great group, and the only thing between me and my scotch is this 20-minute lecture. So I'm going to give you 20 years of research in 20 minutes. So I've spent 25 years in academic medicine, and my research program has been really designed to answer 4 fundamental questions. How does the human body make nitric oxide? What goes wrong in people that can't make it? What are the clinical consequences? How do they present clinically? And then most importantly, how do we fix or restore nitric oxide production? These are my conflicts of interest. We've commercialized a lot of our technology out of the University of Texas, where I was once employed as a professor of molecular medicine. So we have these products on the market today, and my goal is to introduce safe and effective nitric oxide product technologies into every major market segment around the world. And I'll take you through some of the clinical trials on that. I'm a basic scientist. My job is to give physicians the tools they need to better treat, prevent, and cure human disease. And that requires us to think differently, to see what everyone else has seen, but to think what no one else has thought. And so in this 20 minutes, I'm going to show you how we've thought a little bit differently that led to some really cool innovations. But if you fall asleep or if you want to go get a scotch now, this is the take-home message. If you want to live longer and better, you need nitric oxide. And what I'm going to show you is everything that was described by Aubrey and Dr. Ginsberg can be related to the loss of nitric oxide production, whether it's young plasma, whether it's every aspect of aging. And I just want to take you through and give you kind of a broad understanding of a view from the outside into human physiology. So now we've got some cool imaging modality where you can actually look inside the human and look at different organs. And so this is work by Dr. Amen. And you can see here in SPECT scans, really what this is doing is showing you how well perfused the brain is in this particular case. So what you want is a nicely contoured brain that illustrates that every part of the brain is sufficiently perfused. But these holes in the brain, and this is from a former NFL player with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, there's focal ischemia, meaning there's parts of the brain that aren't getting any blood supply. So going back to what Diane said, if they're not getting blood supply to every organ, tissue, and cell in the body, then that organ can't perform. This is obviously an angiogram of a patient that's had an embolus in the right circumflex or the left circumflex here. Obviously, if you don't get this patient to the cath lab in a timely manner, this patient will die. So without sufficient blood supply, the heart fails. But it shows you on the right, if you basically remove this embolus, restore blood flow to the heart, you get normal cardiac function post-heart attack. So it all depends upon the adequate supply of blood and oxygen. And if you go a little bit deeper in either motor or sensory neurons, these neurons have to be adequately perfused to get the action potential, the sodium, potassium. But when you start to develop vascular disease, you develop neuropathy. These nerve endings no longer have blood supply to do their job. So the point I want to make here is every single chronic disease is characterized by decreased blood flow. If you can restore blood flow and perfusion to these organs, tissues, and cells, you can correct and overcome many chronic conditions. So how do you do that? That's the role of nitric oxide. And it's a very simple molecule. I've spent 25 years studying this. It's a free radical, but this is a protective free radical. Because of the polarity of this NO bond, nitric oxide is an electron donor. It donates that electron in its outer orbital. So it's anti-inflammatory, antioxidant by nature. And about 20 years ago, when I was started in the field, we knew that nitric oxide was a vasodilator. So it's produced by the lining of the blood vessels. It's gone in less than a second, but it signals. But in this study in 2015, it was recognized that nitric oxide is required for oxygen uptake and delivery. So now the cardiorespiratory cycle is a 3-gas system. We breathe in oxygen, we excrete CO2, but this does not work without nitric oxide. And in fact, there's nitric oxide bound to a single cysteine residue on the beta chain of hemoglobin. Without nitric oxide, you cannot deliver oxygen. We witnessed this in COVID over the past 3 years, and we had a nitric oxide drug in phase 3 clinical trials. We take a patient with blood oxygen saturation of 78, give them our nitric oxide drug, we can improve their blood oxygen saturation to 98. breathing room air without a mechanical vent, and we saved many lives during that study. But it's involved in every biological function, and I'm going to take you very quickly through this. And so my hope is to give you kind of a little bit of information on a lot of subject matter to nitric oxide. But it's involved in every biological function. It's how our stem cells mobilize and differentiate. It's responsible for erections in men and women. And it was so important that a Nobel Prize was awarded in 1998 for the 3 gentlemen who discovered nitric oxide. And it was Fred who recruited me to join the faculty of UT Medical School in Houston in 2005, where we had a drug discovery program. Unfortunately, Fred passed away just a couple of days ago. But it was he who really gave me my first faculty position to develop my own independent career. And then Lou Ignarro has written the foreword to several of my textbooks. So if you can't make nitric oxide, what happens? We develop high blood pressure. You develop erectile dysfunction, vascular dementia, Alzheimer's, diabetes. I don't have time to show you the data that we published in 2009 on the role of nitric oxide in insulin signaling and glucose uptake. But these are the major unmet or poorly managed diseases that people are facing, and physicians, allopathic physicians, do a really poor job of managing over time. These are also the risk factors for COVID. And that was our impetus for going into FDA clinical trials for COVID, because the people that were dying and getting sick from COVID were the people who couldn't make nitric oxide. So let's dig a little bit deeper and get down to the basics of vascular biology. That a man is as old as his arteries. The older we get, the less nitric oxide we make, and that's responsible for age-related atherosclerotic disease. So this plaque deposition and plaque rupture leads to heart attack and stroke, the #1 killer of men and women worldwide. But when you lose the ability to make nitric oxide in the lining of the blood vessels, that sets the stage for this plaque deposition and atherosclerosis process. In fact, the functional loss of nitric oxide precedes these structural changes by many years, sometimes decades. So we need to know how well our blood vessels make nitric oxide. Because if you have endothelial dysfunction, you're on a very slippery slope to rapid onset and progression of cardiovascular disease. We're all here because we're interested in overcoming the aging process, or at least living better, living longer. And so there's some objective measures of aging. And these 3 main hypotheses: telomeres, followed Bill Andrews for many, many years, the ends of the chromosomes. There's mitochondrial dysfunction. Every single chronic disease is characterized by lower numbers of mitochondria, mitochondrial dysfunction, and then loss of stem cell function and repair. Nitric oxide controls all 3 of these. So now we have a unified theory of aging. And so you cannot improve your telomeres without nitric oxide. You can't improve mitochondria without nitric oxide. And you cannot mobilize and differentiate your own stem cells, or if you're getting stem cell therapy, without first repleting nitric oxide. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because this audience certainly knows the importance of telomeres, the ends of the chromosomes. The data tell us that the shorter the telomeres, the shorter the lifespan. If you can prevent telomere shortening, you can prevent early demise. These were the data that showed us very early on that nitric oxide is what controls and regulates telomerase activity. So it's not only controls the activity of the enzyme, it controls the nuclear expression. So if you have endothelial dysfunction, which means you have an uncoupled NOS enzyme, you not only lose the genetic expression of the telomerase enzyme, but you lose the function. And you'll see on that last study that nitric oxide is the master signaling molecule in the regulation of telomerase, and now provides an opportunity for innovative therapeutic approaches. Mitochondria, the energy-producing organelles of the cell. Again, every single chronic disease, decreased mitochondria, decreased energy efficiency of ATP. Nitric oxide is what controls every aspect about mitochondrial respiration, the reduction of molecular oxygen into water and ATP. If you want to do intermittent fasting, caloric restrictions, sirtuins, if you don't have a functional nitric oxide synthase enzyme, none of these modalities work. Because you can see here the induction of mitochondrial biogenesis by the induction of PGC1 alpha is dependent upon the cell's ability to make nitric oxide. So you want to get the benefits of intermittent fasting, caloric restrictions, NAD, sirtuins, you must have a functional nitric oxide synthase enzyme. And it also extends the oxygen gradient into tissue. So you want to talk about performance, athletic performance. When you restore nitric oxide, you have more mitochondria generating more ATP more efficiently with less oxygen. Now you become a well-oiled machine. And mechanistically, we know this is affecting complex 1 and complex 4. So the entire mechanism of the cytoprotective effects of nitric oxide and ischemia, reperfusion, injury, or modulating oxygen consumption is very well defined. And what about stem cells? We're constantly wearing ourselves out. We just have to repair and replace dysfunctional tissues. And that's the role of our endogenous stem cells. These are the papers that really told us that nitric oxide is the requisite signal for stem cell mobilization and differentiation. When I was at the Institute of Molecular Medicine at Texas Heart Institute, we basically predicted that the availability of nitric oxide predicted stem cell success therapy or failure. So by every objective measure, if you want to live longer and better, your body must be able to produce nitric oxide. So how do we do this? And I'm not going to get into the biochemistry here, but just suffice it to say that there's two ways the body makes nitric oxide. There's an enzyme in the lining of the blood vessels, the endothelial cells, that make nitric oxide, controls vascular tone. And now, interestingly, about 25 years ago, we discovered that we get nitric oxide from our diet. And as I'll show you, it'll explain the mechanism of a plant-based diet, Japanese diet, Mediterranean diet. So if we dissect both of these pathways, the function of the NOS enzyme in the lining of the blood vessel gets less functional with age. So the older we get, the less we make in the lining of the blood vessel. And this is responsible for age-related disease. So our whole question was, can we prevent this age-related decline in nitric oxide production, or at least shift the curve to the right? And if so, could we prevent age-related disease? And the short answer is yes. So let me show you how this is designed to work, because this is very important. Everybody in here knows how Viagra works for erectile dysfunction. Viagra is dependent upon the ability of the cell to make nitric oxide. So when nitric oxide is produced, it's a gas that diffuses in the underlying smooth muscle, activates an enzyme called guanylyl cyclase. This enzyme converts GTP into cyclic GMP, calcium-dependent smooth muscle relaxation, and vasodilation. Viagra is what's called a phosphodiesterase inhibitor. So nitric oxide turns the switch on, Viagra keeps it on. And that's why you're warned against a 4-hour erection, unsafe drop in blood pressure, and all the side effects. These drugs have been on the market for 25 years, and only 50% of the men that are prescribed these drugs respond with better erections. Why is that? It's because they're not making enough nitric oxide in the lining of the blood vessels to activate guanylyl cyclase. So erectile dysfunction is a symptom of nitric oxide insufficiency. And erectile dysfunction is endothelial dysfunction. Now, what about food, nutrition, and supplements? Again, we go back to the basics. The air we breathe is 78% nitrogen. That nitrogen is fixed in the soil through lightning fixation or through nitrogen-fixing bacteria. And this is called nitrification. When we consume plants or consume animal proteins that eat the plants, then our body absorbs the nitrate that's found in these vegetables. In 90 minutes after we consume that, it's concentrated in our salivary glands. Now we would secrete our saliva for the next 6, 8, 10 hours. They're oral nitrate-reducing bacteria that metabolize nitrate into nitric oxide. Without these oral bacteria, you lose the protective benefits of diet. So the first question we asked was, if we wanted to change guidelines and convince the US government that you got it wrong, how much nitrate would you need? And if you look at the literature, you need 300 to 400 milligrams as a bolus in a single serving. The standard American diet or the SAD diet is only providing about 150 milligrams. Then the question was, how much celery, spinach, broccoli would I need to eat to get that 300 and 400 milligrams of nitrate? So in collaboration with Texas A&M and the Department of Food Science, we went to Chicago, Dallas, Los Angeles, Raleigh, and New York. We sampled vegetables off the shelf, we brought it back to the lab, and we analyzed it. There are a lot of numbers on this table, but the point here is if you lived in Dallas or Los Angeles, you could eat 6 stalks of celery and get enough nitrate to normalize your blood pressure. If you lived in Chicago or New York, you'd have to eat 60 or 70 stalks of celery. So there are regional differences in farming and agronomy. If you compare this to organically grown vegetables have on average 10 times less nitrate. So you cannot eat enough organic vegetables to get enough nitrate to fuel this nitric oxide production pathway. The other problem is nitrate is inert in humans. It must be metabolized by bacteria. 200 million Americans wake up every morning and use mouthwash. There are 200 million Americans who have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure. This is not an association, it's causation. And here are the data. If you take normal intensive patients, you put them on mouthwash twice a day for 7 days, their blood pressure goes up. This drives cardiologists crazy. So what is it about these oral bacteria that are responsible for regulating systemic blood pressure? We started on this project in 2002 when the human microbiome was starting to be completely mapped. So we started a study at the Texas Medical Center in collaboration with the dental school, and we just did tongue scrapings, cultured the bacteria, and tried to ask, did the diversity of the oral microbiome have any reflection on steady-state blood pressure? We published this in 2014. The people who had the best blood pressure had the greatest diversity in the oral microbiome. People who had the least diverse oral microbiome had hypertension. So this is a nice association, but it's not causation. We went back, we modified the IRB, we took young, healthy individuals, medical students, dental hygienic students, we took their blood pressure, we did daily tongue scrapings, and we gave them mouthwash twice a day for 7 days. 7 days later, we made a 21-year-old well-trained athlete clinically hypertensive just by giving him mouthwash. His blood pressure went up 26 millimeters of mercury. 4 days after we stopped the mouthwash, his blood pressure normalized. We were able to detect the bacteria that disappeared when his blood pressure went up and the bacteria that reappeared when his blood pressure normalized. And this was our home run slide. We could predict steady-state blood pressure in the entire population by the presence and number of these 4 bacteria. And this explains things like resistant hypertension. If you have high blood pressure, you go to your doctor, he puts you on an ACE inhibitor, an ARB, or a calcium channel antagonist, but yet 50% of these patients don't get better blood pressure management. Why is that? Their hypertension may be a symptom of oral dysbiosis. So if we get people off mouthwash, restore the diversity of the microbiome, then we can normalize systemic blood pressure. So all major chronic diseases, including dementia, Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, there's 4 common denominators in all of these seemingly unrelated conditions. It's low blood flow, what we call focal ischemia, inflammation, oxidative stress, and immune dysfunction. Nitric oxide corrects all of these. So how do we biohack to improve nitric oxide? The earliest stages of vascular inflammation are when monocytes and neutrophils start sticking to the lining of the blood vessels. This is the action of the spike protein. It activates platelets. The blood vessels become like Velcro. And we were able to visualize this in real time. So this is real-time intravital microscopy of an inflamed blood vessel. You can see the monocytes and neutrophils are stuck. There are a lot of cells that have already migrated through. So this is a heightened state of vascular inflammation from a poor diet. If we give that same atherogenic diet, but we restore nitric oxide production, the blood vessels are more dilated, the monocytes and neutrophils don't stick, they don't migrate through. So this was the basis. That gave me enough information that we could now productize this technology. We knew how to make nitric oxide, and so we could develop safe and effective nitric oxide products. We developed an orally disintegrating tablet that generates nitric oxide gas in the oral cavity. Our whole premise was if your body can't make nitric oxide, we got to do it for you. And here just 10 minutes after you take the lozenge, we've dilated the carotid arteries by 13%. That's a 34% increase in blood flow. Patient with Raynaud's syndrome, 10 minutes after, we open up the microcirculation, perfuse the digits, complete symptomatic relief of microvascular disease. And then I'm going to go quickly through here because this is the most gratifying thing I've done in my career. We saw this 5-year-old kid, his name was Jonathan, at Texas Children's Hospital back in 2000 and early 2000s. And in 2015, he came to Texas Children's Hospital in hypertensive crisis. His blood pressure was 200 over 115. He was on many different medications. But his underlying diagnosis was what's called arginosuccinic aciduria. So he's born without an enzyme called arginosuccinate lyase. It's part of the urea cycle. It's present in every cell. So symptomatically, he has hyperammonemia, but he developed liver disease. These kids have to be liver transplanted with 7 or 8 years of age or they'll die of liver failure. They have blood clotting disorders, resistant hypertension, neurological dysfunction, independent of the recurrent hyperammonemia. So these pediatricians came to me and go, what's going on here? We modeled this in mice. We created an ASL knockout. We published this in Nature Medicine in 2011. What we discovered was the ASL enzyme is what tethers the nitric oxide synthase enzyme to the membrane. In these patients that don't have ASL, this protein complex falls apart and these people are completely devoid of any nitric oxide. This was Jonathan. You can see at 5 years of age he was diagnosed. This is his lifelong blood pressure profile. February of 2010, in the pediatric intensive care unit in hypertensive crisis, 200 over 115. At that point, we knew it was a nitric oxide problem. They dosed him with isosorbide and organic nitrate. Within 4 days, his blood pressure normalized, was sent home. And he did well for several months, but he developed what's called tachyphylaxis, or tolerance to these drugs. Came back to Texas Children's Hospital, February of 2011, a year to the date. Blood pressure was 185 over 115. We made a lozenge for him, and his blood pressure completely normalized within 4 hours. Got him off all prescription medication. We published this in the American Journal of Human Genetics in 2013. It was on worldwide news where we basically saved this kid's life by giving him nitric oxide, even overcoming a genetic disorder, an inborn air metabolism. His heart disease resolved in 5 months. Had a heart twice the size of a normal 15-year-old. Within 5 months, we completely reversed his heart disease. His kidney disease resolved within 5 days. Now that we knew how to make nitric oxide, what else? I'm going to go very quickly through this. We may now make a topical nitric oxide because people don't want to look old. The skin is an organ just like the sex organs or the heart. Without blood flow, the organ fails. Make a topical nitric oxide using it twice a day for 30 days. Age spots go away. Inflammation, wrinkles on the skin, fine lines, wrinkles, tone, texture, clarity improves. Remarkable effects on wound healing. This is a full thickness ulcer. We just applied the serum for 10 days and got complete closure. Polycystic acne, it's antimicrobial, improves blood flow, decreases inflammation. 15-year-old acne scars, 30 days later, we completely remodeled, improved collagen deposition, and basically restored the function of that particular organ. So let me just wrap up here. I got 10 seconds left. Stop doing the things that disrupt nitric oxide production. If you're using mouthwash, you have to stop. Get rid of fluoride. It's a neurotoxin, it's an antiseptic, and it kills your thyroid function. And then start doing the things that promote it. Moderate diet, a balanced diet in moderation, moderate physical exercise. And if you don't want to do this, we have products that do it for you. So there's the conclusions. You cannot live longer without restoring the function of nitric oxide. It controls every aspect about what we know about the mechanisms of aging. The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge. There are a lot of people out there that have an illusion of knowledge, and it's very dangerous. So now you have no excuse. So thank you very much.